And so I've got another new video for you guys here today, and right now I'm going to give you the goal for this channel. So my goal right now for this channel is just to examine different ideas and rebut those ideas which are bad, or / illogical or unreasonable, and instead to promote good ideas or good ways of thinking. If I could get some inter-channel dialogue, I think that would really help this channel's ability to effectively explore and convey new ideas. But for today, because I don't have anyone to talk with, I'm going to continue talking about knowledge and our ability to know things. When you ask why about anything, you're looking for a reason. That seems pretty basic, doesn't it? I mean, whenever a 2-year-old asks why, they're looking for a reason. They're trying to understand the world around them. Well, the problem is that after you answer a 2-year-old's question why, they're going to ask why again. And what you're experiencing is the problem of infinite regress, which has actually sort of plagued philosophy for a really long time. And what you're going to wind up with is, let's see here, I think it's called the Münchhausen Trilemma. And the Münchhausen Trilemma will give you 3 answers to the problem of infinite regress. One of them is infinite regress. The other is going to be circular reasoning. And finally, there will be the axiomatic answer. Circular reasoning is going to be any type of reasoning which, forms a circle. It's going to be where one reason is resting upon another reason, which is resting upon the previous reason. So they're sort of resting on each other, and there isn't actually a beginning. Now, the problem with circular reasoning is that, well, it's just that. There is no beginning. It's a chicken and the egg question. And it's more problematic because if you say that all chickens come from eggs, and you are going to say that all eggs come from chickens, well, then you've got a problem right there. So at some point in time, the one had to come without the other, and that's your problem with circular reasoning. Next is infinite regress, which is a problem in itself because you're never going to get an answer. You will never be able to know anything with infinite regress. And then finally, you have got the axiomatic answer, and axioms are going to be a sort of foundation. It's something that we are going to just accept as true because it can't not be true. Now, there's a bit of irony in the Münchhausen Trilemma, in that its existence sort of defeats its own existence. The Münchhausen Trilemma itself is resting on an axiom. In fact, all of the answers in the Münchhausen Trilemma are resting on axioms themselves, or are claiming to be they are claiming that they are to be accepted as true, or the true way of knowing things. So if they themselves are axioms, they are actually resting on axioms, or using them as resting on axioms or their own validation. So the only answer within the Münchhausen Trilemma which is internally consistent is the axiom answer, because it itself is resting on an axiom and it's internally consistent, and that is the axiom. The schools of philosophic thought which accept axioms, they are foundationalist schools of thought. And the axioms which different schools of philosophy base themselves around do vary, and not all foundations can actually be considered true foundations, because some foundations are invalid. They're actually resting on something else. So it's not a foundation if it's actually resting on something else. One example of this is going to be the other day. I was having a conversation with a man who is a preacher from a Christian church, and he made a claim that God was the foundation for all human knowledge, including knowledge of morality. Now, the problem with that is that he is using reasoning to accept that God is the answer. So he's got to be using his own induction and his own experience to come to the conclusion of God being the answer. So his epistemology is not actually resting on God, but it's actually resting on his own experience of the world. So that means that God can't actually be his foundation for knowledge. His foundation of knowledge is going to come from experience and induction. It was a difficult conversation, to say the least, because as much as I tried to explain that to him, he never would quite grasp it, and he would, ask me where my understanding of the world, or where because I explained to him that I was a foundationalist, and he would ask me where my foundations were, and I would try to explain to him that my foundations were in reason itself, that the starting foundation for a person has got to be their own understanding, which, hopefully your understanding of the world is represented, is accurately reflecting the world, which we talked about the laws of thought yesterday, and they sort of help you. Those axioms are consistent with what we experience in reality. So thinking along the lines of those axioms sort of helps to make sure that you're on clean footing, or steady footing, rather. But without accepting basic axioms about knowledge and about, needing to accept your own experiences, because you really have nothing aside from your own experience to go off of. I mean, we're relying on our own experience for literally everything. It's the only teacher of human beings. Is that when you don't rely on your experiences and when you don't rely on axioms which must necessarily be true, you start making logical leaps that are demonstrably just, you can't demonstrate your point. One particular leap that the preacher made, it was an argument against evolution, and the argument was that evolution has so many different variables involved in it that it would never have actually happened. It would be as unlikely for things to evolve as it would be for someone to take all the parts necessary to build a vehicle, put them in a yard, and then eventually a vehicle coming into being from those parts. That is a ridiculous claim, because you can have a reason for different amino acids eventually self-replicating and becoming DNA, and from there you've got a snowball of life. You have reasons for that, and the argument from the sort of unlikelihood of reality existing as it is unsound in of itself, because as far as we know from our experience, there only is one reality, and that reality is the way that it is. So we've never experienced anything aside from things being the way that they are. You can throw in as many variables as you want to get us to where we are, but from what we understand about reality, reality is fairly consistent, and these variables that got us to where we are were always going to produce things as they are. You can take all of the here's something that a lot of people actually don't know whether this is going to be true or not. The sort of quip that we can't mathematically prove how a honeybee flies, that we have no idea, that we've done the math on the honeybee, the physics on it doesn't add up, how exactly it's flying, but it's still flying. Well, logically, we're just going to have to assume that there are variables in play that we aren't actually calculating, if it's actually true that we can't calculate the math that makes a honeybee fly. But all of the little variables, even the ones that we can't see, are acting in such a way that make that honeybee fly. It doesn't matter how many variables there are to it, the honeybee is still flying. It doesn't matter how many variables there were to the creation of reality as it is. It still had no choice but to make reality the way that it is. Just like all the variables affecting the bee make the bee fly. They have no choice but to result in the flight of the bee. So I wanted to go ahead and throw that out there and give that little example to show how the argument from, I guess, it's an odds argument, but it's a really bad odds argument because they actually aren't using odds. They're just using variables and trying to derive odds out of it where there are none. Okay, so here I am. I'm going to be signing off again today. I'm going to say please like and subscribe, but also, if you would like to challenge anything that I've said or like to comment on anything that I've said in any of my videos, I would actually like to, try to get some way to get a conversation started between us. I think that conversation really helps ideas move forward. So if I haven't explained things well enough, or if I explain things in a particularly crappy way, because human, I'm not very good at this. I'm not going to claim to be very good at this, but I'm trying. But I think that a conversation would definitely clear things up, and it may even prove me wrong. And I think that one thing is very important in philosophy is that everyone should always want to be right. So showing someone that they're wrong is probably one of the most benign things you can do, because after that they can correct themselves and make themselves right. So if you could do that for me, I would be very grateful. Anyways, again, signing off. Please like and subscribe.